Grand Rising, Grand Rising. Hope everyone is doing well this Tuesday rising. Hopefully, everyone has recovered from the information exposure concussion they received yesterday from part one of From SLAVS to Color to Mulatto. Because today, part two is going to be just as impactful. So go ahead and greet everyone. Do me a favor. Give me some ones in the chat if you can hear me clearly. The rest of the panel will be in shortly. And some other business-related tasks that they're taking care of, so they'll be in shortly. David Corey, you gave me a 2. Are you saying I need to turn up my mic? Alright, thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Pamela Hall. Alright, so I'll turn my mic up a little bit. Try not to be too loud. I still want y'all to be able to hear the background music and not get too distracted or have a lot of noise bleed over. So hopefully that works. So Grand Rising Pamela Hall, Grand Rising David Corey, Grand Rising Enrique, Grand Rising LJ Free, Afua Jones, Prince William County representing, Grand Rising Big Hawk, Grand Rising El Boria, Grand Rising to the new subscribers, Grand Rising to all those who are listening in and have yet to post in the chat. Grand Rising Carrie Bay, brother. Hopefully everything is going well with you. Pamela says, yes, TMH, be loud. I'm sitting outside. Alright, I'll see if I can turn my mic up a little bit more. Not trying to drown anybody out. Hopefully that's better. So hopefully everyone had a great rising yesterday after we were done with the discussion. Hopefully the links that were put in the forum were able to be beneficial to you. It is our wish to have you guys, ladies and gentlemen, go back there in the forum and place your information in there so that we may help you with not only your genealogy, but with certain builds that we're going to be continuing to do. And if you were on last night, you saw that the links for this rising show were already put back there. I put those back there like around 10:30, 11 o'clock. And they will start being placed there earlier so that you have the opportunity to see exactly what we will be discussing. And as time permits and as we continue to perfect that progress and that process with the forum, we will be placing that information in the forum a couple of days early, as to give you guys a head start as to what will be coming down the pipe so you can be prepared. So shout out to all those that have already registered with the forum, and just know that there's a chat in that section so that you can chat and speak amongst yourselves. And that forum is located at autochtonousAssembly.com/forum. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the current forum that we're discussing in the chat now. That way, you'll be able to see it. Because I've already placed the links in the chat, in that chat forum. Also, the links are in the description box of the CAD Rising Show, along with a brief description of some of the things that we will be talking about. So, Grand Rising Macadon 1, Hope all is well with you. And we highly encourage those to start posting in the forum, placing your questions, your comments, any subjects that you're looking to do research on yourself or you want us to do research on. Someone had placed in a forum chat that they wanted to do a book. I think that's a great idea. However, you place a comment in the chat without registering. So when you place your comment in the Conscious Assembly forum without registering, it just shows up as a guest number. So we have no way to know who put it in there. So I did respond, but if that was you, next time when you get the opportunity, register so we'll know who you are, and we can also give you credit. And if you so choose, you can take the lead on that. And we'll help you get those resources to start the said book. Also, when it comes to any business adventures or business ideas that you have, also you can reach us through that forum or through our email address at attacktodthisassembly.com. See what else. If I'm missing anything else, I don't think I am. That being said, let's go ahead and get started with the public service announcements while we're waiting for the rest of the panel to get up in here. This episode of the Cab Grand Rising Show is brought to you by Autochthonous Assembly, where the real work gets done. Because Autochthonous Assembly is about the gathering of the minds that do the work. Right? That's what it's about, getting things done. So who are we? Autochthonous Assembly is a non-profit organization dedicated to raising up indigenous American voices by using genealogy, also known as family history, which is the study of families and the tracing of their lineage. And history, genealogists use oral interviews, historical records, genetic analysis, and other records to obtain information about a family and to demonstrate kinship and pedigrees of its members. Our core values are the foundation of our company, which are essential to our success and serve as a lens through which we evaluate every business decision. And those core values are, but are not limited to, integrity, know and do what is right, respect, treating others the way you want to be treated, responsibility, embrace opportunities to contribute, servant leadership, which is to serve the common good. And you can find our core values, a mission statement on autochthonousassembly.com/about. And when it comes to autochthonousassembly.com, we always like to remind everyone, especially those that are new and trying to figure out what's going on and what we're doing and what we're about. Our goal is to help you with your genealogy, meaning help you with your family tree and tie you into whatever tribe that you belong to or that you are looking to belong to, whether it's an Indian tribe, African house, as they're referred to, German family, Russian family, no matter what it is. Our goal is to help you tie into those tribes. We're also here to help you if you should so choose to be financially independent by giving you all the resources that we have at our disposal free of charge. And if you should choose to use those resources to not only help your family, your relatives, your community, and or your chat, then what you can do is you can let us know and we will be more than glad to help. Give me one quick second and I'll be right back with you. Give me a brief moment. All right. My apologies. I'm back now. So, like I said, hopefully everyone has recovered from the unintentional information concussion that we all received yesterday. I know I have. Hopefully you have your hard hats with extra cushion and the whole nine. Because it's time to get back to it and get moving. So we'll go ahead and drop the first link in the chat. So that you can go ahead and get started. Pamela Hall says, Lord, I missed yesterday. I have to go back and listen. Yeah, Pamela Hall, I was listening to it again this rising while I was getting ready, and it's mind-blowing to say the least. It ties a lot of things together. Definitely ties a lot of things together. So go ahead and put the link in the chat. So that we can get started. Grand Rising.
Grand Rising.
I'm just dropping the first link about Plaçage in the chat. I was telling everybody I hope they got their hard hat because today is going to be even more so of a doozy.
No problem.
Let me know if y'all can hear Bones. Give me some ones
Mic check.
in the chat.
1 2 1 2.
Who is it? Sorry, bad habit. All right. So Bones, you think they ready for the day?
Ooh-wee. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, this is gonna be a good one. So
Somehow I ended up in a 30-minute conversation. That's what took me so long about yesterday's show.
wow, that's phenomenal. That means people are listening, paying attention, asking questions, and they're intrigued to say the least, and it's causing, if nothing else, us to rethink the way everything has gone. So now when I hear someone talk about English colonies and things of that nature, I automatically start thinking about the Huguenots that came and took over. The last thing we stopped on yesterday were SLAVS and slaves. And what I want to do is I want to go back to those etymologies right quick and revisit those because I think those are very powerful. Because of the way that they break down. And just the optics. So give me 1 minute or less.
That gives me an opportunity to get my Grand Rising in. Grand Rising, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful rising and ready to get some work done.
Oh, yeah.
Hey there, Free. Grand Rising.
Grand Rising, Bone.
Grand Rising.
Feeling Nate.
Grand Rising Free. So I'm going to share my screen again so that we can actually see.
Grand Rising, Jafrida. Hope all is well, cuz.
Grand Rising, Jafrida.
Grand Rising to the chat. Miss being in there like I used to be. Much love to all of you.
Alright. So, here's the word Slav. And it basically breaks down to the point of name originally identified a member of a speech community, related a Nemu dumb, foreign, literally of different voice, Old English piad, which meant both race and language, identical with the Slav in personal names, such as Russian, Miroslav, literally a peaceful fame, Mstislav, vengeful fame, Jiroslav, form for fury, perhaps from the power root klu, to hear, influenced by French and German Slav, where they changed the way that it was spelled from 1788 to 1866, which ties in with the Emancipation Proclamation, which we may have time to touch on today, but more than likely we'll get to that in tomorrow rising show. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this, because just the placement of a vowel, which Free constantly reminds me is an oath, changes the way that we look at the word. But as we see in the etymology, the changing of the spelling did not change the meaning. And that's indicated when I click on slave, or Slav with an E, and it just reads late 13th century person who was chattel or property of another, from Old French esclave. From medieval Latin sclavis, slave. Source also Italian schiavo, French esclave, Spanish esclavo. Originally slave, Slavs, see Slav. So just because an E was placed here does not mean that it does not mean this. So used in a secondary sense becomes of the many Slavs sold into slavery by conquering peoples. Okay. So Slav, 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 Slav. Now the reason why I wanted to do that and use that demonstration, because we're going to be hearing the word slave a lot. Now considering that the word Slav wasn't spelled slave until 1788, and we're talking time references in the early 1500s, it would make more sense that the term Slav would be used for that time reference versus slave, because slave did not change the spelling until 1788. Again, it's like when the terms of African American are put in a document to describe quote unquote Negroes or colors, which we all know now are nothing more than métis individuals. So I just want to put that in its proper perspective, so when we start talking about Slavs, we know exactly what we're talking about. So now it's time for us to get back to the subject matter at hand. Plaçage. Grand Rising, the Darien Woods. Grand Rising, Doodle Vision. Doodle Vision's already coming on time, dropping bombs. He said Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. Yugo equals Huguenots. Come on, man. Already. Go, I'm sorry.
With Czechoslovakia, remember vowels are interchangeable, so that's easily Czechoslovakia. There's that Slav again.
See, you cannot get placed up under that spell with these words. Remember, let's look at the time frames, and then look at the words that they're using. Why would they be using the word slave when that didn't come into existence until the late 1700s? So let's look at placage, shall we? David Core said they made Yugos. They started making Yugos in the 90s. Anybody ever seen a Yugo? Just out of curiosity. Yeah, that was a tiny car. Anyway.
Yep.
See something right quick. 1788. Okay. So placage, as I was calling it, or mispronouncing plaçage, or plaquage, was a recognized extra legal system in French and Spanish slave colonies of North America. Does anybody know what extra legal means? Including the Caribbean, by which ethnic European men entered into civil unions with non-Europeans or African, Native American, and mixed race descent. Remember, when they're talking about Africans, they're talking about those South Africans or Afrikaneers or Afrikaans. They're not
Quick
talking.
interjection.
Go ahead.
Could the extra be like extramarital when they say extra legal? So basically outside of the parameter.
That's a good point.
But it's just something that people do until caught.
Very much, yeah, very possible.
Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, never thought of it like that. I'm just trying to figure out. It just strikes me as odd why they would put it extra in front of legal, like super legal.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
But thanks. Just never thought of that. It basically goes on to read, the term comes from a French placer, meaning to place with. The women were not legally recognized as wives, but were known as placées. Their relationships were recognized among the free people of color as mariages de la main gauche, or left-handed marriage. So it says the relationships were recognized among the free people of color. Okay. Well, the free people of color.
Could that be what inferred be meaning on the census records in some cases?
What do you mean, Bones?
I don't know if you ever seen like that show Children and that show like Marriages, and it'll say inferred. Inferred marriage, inferred children.
Can't say that I have.
Yeah, I got a couple of records that got that written on them.
Okay.
Just asking.
Yeah, definitely something to think about, and we'll have to do some research on, obviously. So if anyone's in the chat and they're able to do it, could you look that up, please, and place it in the chat? That would be greatly appreciated.
That would be amazing. Good eyeball.
Exactly. So, free people of color, this is who we're looking at. Because it mentioned that they were basically placed in a different status. I'm going to go ahead and place a link in the chat. I think I did it already, but I'm going to redo it. Doesn't hurt to do it again. So, free people of color, in the context of the history of slavery in the Americas, free people of color. In French, it was gens de couleur libres. In Spanish, is gente de color libre, where people of mixed African and European descent who were not enslaved, meaning Slavs that were not enslaved. The term arose in French colonies including La Louisiane and settlements on Caribbean islands such as Saint Dominique, Saint Lucia, Dominican, Guadeloupe, and Martinique, where a distinct group of free people of color developed. Freed, now see, here's where you pay attention. It says freed African slaves. Could this be Slavs from Africa? Afrikaneers that were Slavs were included in the term affranchis, but historically they were considered as distinct from the free people of color. In these territories and major cities, particularly New Orleans, and those cities held by the Spanish, a substantial third class of primarily mixed race free people developed. So I'm going to stop right there right quick. So while explaining free people of color, it tells you that these individuals were people of mixed African and European descent. We know that the Afrikaners who created that language in South Africa were the Slavs that came over here. Some were brought over here. And it says these are the ones that were not enslaved. So these free people of color were actually your métis that were not enslaved. And then it tells you where the term arose from La Louisiane and the Caribbean islands, where it was prominent. And then it says there's a distinct group of free people of color developed. Okay. Then it goes on to read freed African slaves or freed Afrikaners or Afrikaan Slavs were included in the term enfranchised. So that is another group already. And it says, but historically they were considered as distinct from free people of color. So now you have free people of color, you have enfranchised, and then it goes on to talk about in these territories and major cities, particularly New Orleans and those cities held by the Spanish, a substantial third class of primarily mixed race free people developed. So now we're looking at three different classes of free métis. You have your free people of color, you have your enfranchised, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and now you have your mixed race. And
it seemed like it changed between French and Spanish. That the French viewed it one way and the Spanish viewed it another way.
Mm-hmm. But I wanted to make sure that before we go any further, and Doodle Vision says mixed race free people equal Creole. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we understood this because they're going to start using these terms interchangeably, and we can get lost if we don't know who we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Just
It kind of sounds like a caste system within the Métis people.
Exactly. That's the part that I was looking for, and how I was looking at how they broke it down. So we know that the free people of color are your Afrikaners and Europeans, or your Métis, that have Afrikaner and European descent in some shape, form, or fashion, and they were normally on the islands. Your enfranchised, let's look up who they are, and I will also place this in a link too.
I'm interested because I know, at least by the way that you're pronouncing it, it keeps making me think of like the opposite would be disenfranchised, because that's kind of how it's sounding. And
Right.
That's how one of the terms they use to describe our people, that we've been disenfranchised. So if that is the pronunciation of Francis, that's going to be interesting in context.
All right, so I'm putting it in the chat. And I'm sure Brother Doodle Vision can help us with that, being that French is his second language. He says the same caste system still exists in the Caribbean, Mesoamerica, and South America. Wow.
That's why you hear about all the bleaching of skin and different things going on, the Sammy Sosa and all that stuff. Yeah.
So, affranchi is a former French legal term denoting a freedman or emancipated Slav, but was a term used to refer to pejoratively to mulattoes. Come on, man. It is used in English to describe the class of freedmen in Saint Dominique and other Slav-holding French territories who held legal rights intermediate between those of free whites and enslaved Afrikaners. I'm saying Afrikaners. They say Africans. I'm saying Afrikaners. Because the whole continent ain't called Africa. And everybody in Africa don't call themselves African. Mama call them clay. I'm going to call them clay.
Yeah, you can say African because African and Afrikaners are both Dutch, one southern, one north.
Yes, we know that.
And it's just the way that they switch the names. It's the same way they do the Acadia. You have Acadia with a C, Acadia with a K. You have Africa with a C, Africa with K. Like, they keep doing this on purpose. Again, that Lectio difficilior. They're just trying to overlay to keep you confused.
Right, and it goes on to read in Saint Dominique, roughly half the enfranchised were gens de couleur libres, which goes back to free people of color. Then they put in semicolon mulatto, and the other half African SLAVS or Afrikaner SLAVS or SLAVS that were Afrikaners. So you have half the enfranchised that were considered people of color or mulatto, and then you had the other half that was SLAVS from the South Afrikaners. Okay. Let's look at mixed race.
Can I interject real quick?
Sure, please.
I find it interesting when we can see that this same construct can be seen as a type of business model. And then you have this word. Like, what is a franchise? Like, if we just put it in layman's terms, what's a franchise?
Wow.
So yeah, it's like you can see how they've set up their way of doing things, thinking, living, operating, just in the terminology that they use.
I'm looking up franchise, right? In etymology. And let's see what it comes up with. Doodle Vision says a Franchi equals merchant, also a French word. Whoa. Come on, man. Stop playing. And franchise. Etymology. I put it in the chat. Hope y'all got y'all hard hats on.
Don't take them off.
They strapping them on. Please put them on.
Put them on.
Franchise. Noun. 1300. Franchise. A special right or privilege by grant of a sovereign government. Also, national sovereignty. Nobility of character. Generosity. The king's authority. The collective rights claimed by a people or town or religious institution. Also used of the state of Adam and Eve before the fall from Old French franchise. Freedom. Exemption. Right. Privilege. From variant stem of franc. Free. See franc, adjective. From late 14th century, as freedom, not being in servitude. Social status of a freeman. Early 15th century. Citizenship, membership in a community or town, membership in a craft or guild, the special right, since narrow 18th century, to particular legal privilege, then right to vote. From mid 15th century, as right to buy or sell. Also, right to exclude others from buying or selling, a monopoly, meaning authorization by a company to sell its products or services is from 1959. Grand Rising, Zotella. Did y'all just hear that?
Yes, that's like the favorite child scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Right to vote. You have the right to exclude others from voting. I keep saying there's nothing new under the sun. This is happening today. Like, we're experiencing this today. We can see it playing out in real time.
Clear the blast area. Clear the blast area. Clear the blast area. Gotta drop it.
Kind of funny. Under that definition, a system can be a franchise.
Exactly.
Correct. But there's always going to be someone who's over the franchise, and the franchise always has to operate as however it's deemed based on the owner. So, I mean, it's just like Subways or McDonald's, these different chains that are franchises. Like at the end of the day, like when you go in one, it's going to feel like you're in the others. And that's how this caste system works in these countries. Doesn't matter which one of these countries you go into, you're still going to feel that sense of either pressure or that sense of entitlement. However you fall within the system, you're going to feel it because it's part of the freaking franchise.
Yep, and it's worldwide.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting within that definition, out of all things that they would bring in terminology of Ottawa Ama or Adam and Eve, being that the first wars were between male and female, very first wars. So having said that in context to that definition, knowing how a lot of times, take civil rights, for example, our women would end up yoking up with their women to support their cause, and then our women would always end up disenfranchised.
Remember my question yesterday, when was the last time in history man and women ruled side by side?
Good question. And why the imbalance?
I'm starting to look at it. Maybe that's the problem. Women trying to be in charge, men trying to be in charge, but it was never meant to be that way. It's meant to be side by side.
I agree 100%.
So the chat is buzzing. Grand Rising, EJ Coppertone, Grand Rising Zotella. Doodle Vision says that's why the countries are corporations. That's also why corporations are persons. Exactly, corporations are people. Darian Wood says, so that's what the league is doing to players. They give them franchise tags and all that. There you go.
Y'all are on it. Yes, you got it.
Exactly. So a corporation is a franchise. The difference between a corporation and a franchise, legally from the standpoint of the United States, is the ability to reproduce yourself in like kind. Meaning to produce.
But listen to the key word though. Reproduce yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the difference between
fruitful and multiply, reproduce yourself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
This terminology again, like it's based from somewhere. So this is getting very interesting.
It's like the difference between what we call today chain stores and mom and pop stores.
Perfect.
And what happened with most stores before they go to franchise? They team up and merge, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Sure do.
And can they become conglomerates?
Or juggernauts?
From the merger, they have offspring.
Mm-hmm.
They sure
Their
do.
offspring is known as the franchises. Wow. I don't mind me wheels turning.
Yeah.
You're spot on.
So Taylor says private corps are secluded. Private corporations are exempt from having to be beholden to stockholders. They are not traded publicly on the stock market, therefore they are not at the whim or folly of the emotions of the public. That's why Chick-fil-A, which is a franchise, is a privately held company. It doesn't matter what their founder's belief is because they don't have to kowtow or cater to what the people's perception is because they are not using public money.
That's why they're never open on Sunday. Ran by the religious, if I'm right. The Mormons, if I'm right.
And I believe that Truett Cathy, I believe he was a Southern Baptist, if I'm not mistaken. I have to do some research on it. I don't think he was Mormon. But I like to say is that when we look at the way that these corporate structures are structured and we look at these franchises, a franchise is nothing more than being able to replicate yourself without a merger. You get your franchise paperwork in, and then you can reproduce as many times as you choose without having to merge. Because if you think about it, a merger normally happens when you have two competing companies that become one parent company, and they absorb each other's clientele, such as what happened with Sprint and T-Mobile. Hopefully that
But
helps.
oftentimes, and they're not supposed to be able to create a monopoly.
Well, depends on how it's defined. It depends on if there's still availability to compete. So when we look at the word enfranchi, and then it goes on in the second paragraph to read, the term is derived from the French word for emancipation dash enfranchisement or enfranchisement in terms of political rights. But the enfranchised were barred from the franchise. They were barred from voting prior to 1791 court case following the French Revolution. This decision in their favor prompted a backlash from the French white planter class on Saint Dominique, who also exerted power in France. These elements contributed to the outbreak of the Haitian Revolution. So in the event that these affranchised or affranchised were able to vote in 1791, that's what caused the Haitian Revolution.
So it sounds like they set these different colonies up under this caste system and was there to perpetuate it until it got its feet under it, for lack of a better term. And as soon as it's able to run by itself, then France checks out or goes behind the curtain. So you can't ever link it back to France. That's what I'm hearing, what you just read.
Yeah, it runs by itself. Just like McDonald's is ran by teenagers, literally. You have a manager that manages or oversees the store, but the teenagers actually run it. They're on the register, they run the drive-through, they basically run the store. Same scenario, because there are processes put in place that allow an individual or a company to run with the least amount of mental stability, if you will, or
effort.
Thank you.
Got you. I know. I see exactly what you're saying. Interesting stuff.
Exactly. So already we haven't even got into 2 paragraphs of a placage, and we've discovered that there's 3 distinct free people of color. Okay.
And that's important in context because placage, just to kind of sum it up really quick, means what again?
Placage is a recognized extralegal system in French and Spanish Slav colonies of North America, and by which ethnic European men entered into civil unions with non-Europeans or Afrikaners, Native American, and mixed race descended women.
Okay, just wanted it to be fresh.
So they will be involved with individuals that were not considered European, as we would know them. They were either métis, some form of mixed race, basically mulatto, métis.
Saying French or Spanish heritage mixed with indigenous heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And the European side was coming on the male's end.
Right.
More or less. Okay, got it.
It was very rare.
You got 3 classes of métis, right? You would have the Spanish métis, you would have the French, and you would have the English.
Mm-hmm. That is true. At the end of the day, they're still the same language family, which tell you they come from the same root. But it is important to know who is who because of the way that they choose to govern, and also their sleight of hand and quote unquote friendship. So
Yeah, so
because I remember yesterday they mentioned that they ranked them separate. They look at them separate. The English and the French and the Spanish half breeds, they all mark them differently.
makes sense. They carved up our lands based off of those terminologies or people groups. So yeah, I'm with you.
Grand Rising Copper Indio, he says task workers and task masters. Talk about the enfranchised and the franchise. So let's go back to that. Now that we know that we got 3 different races of freed people of color. 3 classes.
Caste system within a caste system.
Exactly. So then it goes on to state that it was widely practiced in New Orleans where planter society had created enough wealth to support the system. It also took place in the Latin-influenced cities of Natchez and Biloxi, Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama, St. Augustine, and Pensacola, Florida, as well as St. Dominique, which is now the Republic of Haiti. Plaçage became associated with New Orleans as a part of its cosmopolitan society. In recent years, at least 3 historians, Kenneth Aslakson, Emily Clark, and Carol Schulter, have challenged the historicity of Plaçage and have referred to many of its features, including quadroon balls, as a myth. Of course, they will do that because they don't want to view their
That's a Where's Waldo tactic.
View their peers or their relatives, their ancestors as the type of people that they really were. So let's look at the Plaçage system and history. So think about it. What is a franchise? It's a systematized way of doing business that can be duplicated anywhere under a brand. So the Plaçage system developed from the predominance of men among early colonial populations who took women as consorts from Native Americans, free women of color, and some enslaved Africans. So basically, these colonial men, chose women consorts from either Native Americans, free women of color, which were your Métis, and some enslaved Africans, which were your SLAVS from Africa.
You get that.
That's right. Set the record straight. That's right.
So it says, given the harsh conditions in the colonies, persuading women to follow the men was not easy. France sent women convicted along with their dead husbands, and in 1719 deported 209 women felons who were of character to be sent to the French settlements in Louisiana. Wait.
Ha ha.
What?
Now y'all starting to see.
Light bulb.
Hold on.
These gypsy women. Mm-hmm.
It says, given the harsh conditions in the colonies, persuading women to follow the men was not easy. France sent women convicted along with deader husbands, and in 1719 deported 209 women felons who were of character to be sent to French settlements in Louisiana.
What does character mean in this situation?
Oh, they're going to break it down for you, bro. Yeah, me a moment. They're going to break it down. Oh, Cliff Tip says, Oh, Pamela says, where are you reading? My apologies, Pamela. I'm reading from the Wikipedia Plaçage. I'll place it in the chat again. All the links are in the description. And they're also in the Autonomous Assembly form in order that I'm going.
Ain't this around the time the outburst of burlesque pops up?
Yes, it is. And I'm glad that you said that because, again, you have to remember who's behind Hollywood, the media now. It's the Huguenots and the Hughes. Now, think about how they portray us as a people, but especially our women on Black entertainment television.
Yeah.
And think about that as you listen to this historical account of where all this actually comes from. And then you can see how this whole title swap and character swap is still going on to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Free, because by looking at Plaçage, and then when you go read Free People of Color in Wikipedia, with Wikipage, you are looking at the exemplary of Lectio Difficilior, because the way it's presented from the Free People of Color perspective and the way it's presented from the Plaçage perspective is the same thing, but they're changing the characters. So hopefully we'll be able to show you that. Dude says, drop it like it's hot. Let's make it rain. You crazy, dude.
Yeah, wonder who was all these women doing these French little prostitutions and brothels back then during New Orleans, huh?
Bro, we about to break this down. I got the links. That's why I was up this rising. And it's also in the forum. It's also in the chat. And excuse me, in the description of the Grand Rising show. So
they thought they were going to get away, huh?
Not even. So it says the placing system first developed in Saint Martinique. France sent women from the poorhouses to the West Indies, but they had the reputation of also being former prostitutes from La Salpeterie. So let's look up this La Salpetriere. It's La Salpetriere. La Salpetriere.
Dun 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 dun.
Y'all about to see what's really good. Hospital Universitaire Petite Salpêtrière is a teaching hospital in the 13th arrondissement of Paris, part of the Assistance Publique Hôpital de Paris, and a teaching hospital of Sorbonne University. It is one of Europe's largest hospitals. Y'all ready for this? The Salpêtrière was originally a gunpowder factory. Salpêtrière being a constituent of gunpowder. But in 1656, at the direction of Louis XIV, it was converted into a hospice for the poor women of Paris. It served as a prison for prostitutes and a holding place for women who were learning disabled, mentally ill, or epileptic, as well as poor. So stop right there.
Did they just send the whole hospital over here?
This was a prison under the name of a hospital that used to be a gunpowder factory, where they kept these women who were learning disabled, mentally ill, or epileptic, as well as poor. So they're poor, were in prison.
Ain't hospice part of hospital?
Mm-hmm.
That's making me wonder what some of these asylums really were.
Remember we talked about them about the asylums and how they were using it. Some of these women were being placed in these asylums because they were the ones that held the land, and it was amazing how the asylum rate, the in-processing of women being in asylums in the middle 1800s, like quadrupled and quintupled.
Yeah, I remember we stayed up one night reading over that. The numbers jumped dramatically.
We also talked about
and then
that
when you look at
corn planting, and I'm sorry,
you look at what they When you look at what they can commit a woman for back then too, it didn't make no sense.
Right. So having said that, and we know that at different times there's all this like big, huge orphan wave, where to the point that orphanages had to be built. Where were all these babies coming from?
The women that was placed in these hospitals.
That's
Remember
what
what
it
they
sounded
said?
like to me.
If a woman had a menstrual cycle that was irregular, that was enough to get her committed.
Yep, I remember that.
Oh, you know what?
How do you take the land?
Remove the woman.
Goodness.
Clear the
That's what I'm
blast zone.
saying. I think that was the problem. Separation between men and women. If they was together as one union, it wouldn't matter. You still wouldn't be able to move the land.
Exactly. Clear the blast zone. Clear the blast zone. Clear the freaking blast zone. One time for your mind. 2 times
Bingo.
for your spirit. 3 times for your soul. Let's go. So this was a hospital that they had placed disabled, mentally ill, and epileptic, and poor women into. It was also notable for its population of rats and a bloated and unresponsive bureaucracy. Although the Petite Salpêtrière was much admired for the architectural ambitions of Liberal Rouen, it provided wretched living conditions for its inmates. The building was enlarged in 1684, and on the eve of the Revolution, it had become the world's largest hospital, with a capacity of 10,000 patients, plus 300 prisoners, mainly prostitutes swept from the streets of Paris.
And what year was this again?
This was during the eve of the Revolution, which was beginning of 1789.
That's a lot of people for building a hole at that time too. 10,000? Wow.
Yeah. It's more like a city.
Exactly.
So it said, Salpêtrière, they were paired with convicts and forcibly expatriated to dun 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 New France.
Oh my goodness. And it's funny how they keep using the word prisoner within these accounts, because even within today's Constitution, the only form of slavery that's supposed to be legal now is if you're a prisoner, correct? So that's like a double tag for a Slav.
So,
Interesting.
During the September Massacre of 1792, the Salpêtrière was stormed on the night of 3/4 September by a mob from the impoverished working-class district of the Faubourg Saint-Marcel, or Marseille, with the avowed intention of releasing the detained street girls. 134 of the prostitutes were released. 25 mad women were less fortunate and were dragged, some still in their chains, into the streets and murdered. Darian Wood says, how much of over here was a penal colony? A large part of it, if you think about it. The Compendio,
Initially, the 13 colonies would have been based on historical accounts.
The Compendio says it's amazing to see how the same thing that was done in Australia was done here. Because that was a prison colony as well. Then it goes on to read, at the very end of the 18th century, the early humanitarian reforms in the treatment of the mentally ill were inhabited here by Philippe Pinel, friend of the encyclopedists. The iconic image of Pinel as the liberator of the insane was created in 1876 by Tony Robert Fleury. The Pinel sculpture monument stands before the main entrance of Place Marie Curie, Boulevard de la Hôpital. So That's where those women came from. So now they flooded New France, aka the Americas, with prostitutes, disabled women, learning disabled women, mentally ill women, and epileptic Slavs and poor Slavs. Keep that in mind. So now I'm back on places. Now through the vision says, now you know why the Catawba Sapani were going to be the Navy for Louisiana, aka New France. The convicts were being sent to New Orleans. Whoa. Man, you just can't drop a bomb like that. Come on, man, stop playing. Y'all hear that? I'm going to read it again. Through the vision says, now you know why the Catawba Sapani were going to be the Navy for the Louisiana, aka New France. The convicts were being sent to New Orleans. And we were going to be the transportation. Clear the blast area. Clear the blast area. Clear the friggin' blast area. Alright. I'm good.
I have to ask this too.
Sure.
If you send a flood of the people that you described over here, and now they have a disposition for a certain occupation, imagine how that would affect our population in terms of how we reproduce.
Exactly.
That's one of those I can't curse you, but I can cause you to curse yourself moments in real time.
Just think about how many women they sent to New Orleans. That would change the whole makeup of the people there.
Correct.
Especially because what else we know? We know European men are marrying Aboriginal women who are the daughters of chiefs. So a lot of the predominant women are being snatched up by these Europeans. So who is the Aboriginal man laying with? Hate to use them words, but let's think about it. It's obvious.
Yep. Correct. They sent a bunch of women, foreign women, into the camp. And the men fell for it. And there you have it. Nothing new under the sun.
So they use nature. You remove one's mate, he will find a replacement. That's why they studied.
I mean, they have been with us for decades, centuries, so they already knew us.
Think about it. The foreigner got first dibs to the Aboriginal woman. And I remember, I think, asking this 3-4 days ago. Where was the Aboriginal man?
Right.
And what are the consequences when your woman becomes the perfect suitor for the foreigner? Who are you left with? What are you going to pick up? Come on, we know how this works. Oh, he going to touch my women? So what? I got one of his now. We know that mentality. We living in it now.
Yeah, we propagate it hard. I used to be guilty as charged.
First wars. I'm telling y'all, like it's
male and female. Oh, I know.
If all first things are first, all second things follow. We gotta get it right.
Men and women. That's why I said this ruling, this patriarchal. No, that's the problem. Because when you separate the two, now they're weak, and you allow outsiders to be able to attack them. Men and women stand side by side, then nothing can break that union. It's when you separate it and see it as an individual, it's tarnished.
Right.
The original,
keep showing me this over and over.
The original divide and conquer.
Yep. The only one you really need. Because it'll perpetrate itself all through time. As long as they're men and women, this fight is going to go on because of what was created.
And Doodle Vision says, classic wife swap. Then he goes on to say, that he says at LJ Free, the loose women and liquor they flooded this land distracted the men who impregnated the women, giving them mestizo children with no land rights, new Slavs by a different name. Wow.
That's Copper Indio.
Oh, I'm sorry, Copper.
Spot on. He hit the bullseye. Couldn't have said it better. New Slavs by a different name. Any questions, anyone?
A whole lot of wows.
Yeah. So now we're starting to see how this happened. You flood New Orleans with prostitutes
And liquor.
and liquor.
What happens now? You flood a house party with women and liquor.
Copper Moons says Alien versus Predator.
Golden Moon.
I'm sorry, Golden Moon. Hey, I need to adjust my glasses. My bad, Golden Moon. I done merged your name. Reading all these different languages that messed me up. My bad.
I like that analogy though. Yeah.
So let's continue on, shall we? So it says, the placage system first. Okay, I already read that. It says, oh yeah, here's another one. Here's in addition to what happened. It says let me go back. It says France also relocated young women orphans known as king's daughters to their colonies for marriage to both Canada and Louisiana. France recruited willing farm and city-dwelling women known as casket girls because they brought all their possessions to the colonies in a small trunk or casket. So while they're flooding New Orleans and the islands with these prostitutes and mentally disabled women, France and Louisiana are being flooded with king's daughters and casket girls.
Y'all know them gypsies. Y'all know them gypsies
girl.
with them trunks. With them trunks, them gypsies.
Casket girls like vampires?
No.
Casket girls?
We're gonna do king's daughters. And then we're gonna go over casket.
This sounds crazy. Okay, let's go.
King's daughters. You know, they had classes of free people of color. Of course, they're gonna have classes of women, right? Because these were women to marry, not the women to frolic with. So it said king's daughters is a term used to refer to approximately 800 young French women who migrated to New France between 1663 and 1673 as part of a program sponsored by King Louis XIV of France. The program was designed to boost New France's population, both by encouraging male immigrants to settle there and by promoting marriage, family formation, and the birth of children. While women and girls certainly immigrated to New France, both before and after this time period, they were not considered to be filles du roi, as the term refers to women and girls who were actively recruited by the government and whose travel to the colony was paid for by the king. They were also occasionally known as the king's wards, where wards meant those under the guardianship of another. So, if you look at it, this goes back to what Free was talking about. You have the women that were put in these hospitals who obviously had children. And if these women were unstable or their husbands abandoned them, where do you think the children went? The children became wards of the king. So then he would put them into these orphanages, aka king's daughters. Then they grew up a certain way and they was taught certain etiquettes, and then they were shipped off to New France as well. So you had the king's daughters and their crazy mamas in France. In New France. Any questions?
Instruments. They were instruments. You done seen it a million times in these movies where they had these schools where they had these young women and they raise them and they teach them to be a particular way. You're just seeing it actually happen in history now.
Right.
They were trained to be wives with a purpose. France had a reason why they were programming these women to come over here and be wives.
Sounds like Black Widow. I Am Flying Squirrel said the Salt movie. Yep.
Yep.
Long Kiss Goodnight.
Yep. It's the same story without all the bang bang and the Hollywood cameras.
I Am Flying Squirrel says Salt, the movie.
Yep. Spot on.
They got it from somewhere.
Golden Moon, no, we have not started on the Knights of Templar. So, oh, he was asking Macadon one. My bad. Mr. TJ, Grand Rising, Mr. TJ. He says debutante's ball. That's basically what it boils down to.
Yeah, when you go and you pick the suitor, men on one side, women on the other side. Remember the history of that ball.
So now we're going to get to the one that Free was asking about. Casket Girl. A casket girl, originally known as a fille à la cassette, girl with a casket, but also known historically as a casket girl or a pelican girl or a comfort girl, was one of the women brought to France, to the French colonies of Louisiana, to marry. The name derives from the small chests known as caskets, in which they carried their clothes.
Huh?
The custom goes back in the question of France to the 17th century, when France relocated young women orphans known as king's daughters to their colonies for marriage to both Canada and Louisiana and the French Indies. The women sent to the West Indies were often from poor houses in France, but had the reputation of also being former prostitutes from La...
Here we go.
So they were reformed prostitutes.
Here we go. That's what I'm saying. Carried around their clothes in a chest they call it a casket. And now today, the same type of energy is always popping off about their closet. I can't.
But y'all even seen now. Y'all seen them gypsies, whole packs of them in the movies, walking around with their clothes. Y'all done seen it? They just made it entertaining for you.
This is crazy.
Whole circuses.
Doodle Vision says a small trunk is called a casket. My grandmother had one that sat at the end of her bed from when she went to college. Yep. Now they call them chests.
Chest,
yep.
Exactly. That's what I call them.
Caskets first. Yeah, they were called caskets first.
Interesting name.
So if you think about it, the casket girl is your original call girls, your high-end prostitutes. They don't just sleep with anybody. They're suited for the more prominent.
Right.
They got levels to it. Woo.
I mean, they got levels and classes and everything else. Why not this?
They're still doing too much.
So now we're seeing what happened. Because if we think about it, our colonies, our ancestors never really talk about prostitution, right? But why is it so prominent in the United States now? Now we know.
I think they'd be embarrassed to talk about it. Because look at how it was encouraged. Prostitution was encouraged. Then somehow it became a crime. After they done put all these prostitutes around our ancestors, it become a crime. Ain't that something?
Ain't that how they do drugs?
Yep. You nasty.
Copper India says, in real talk, in the last few years, they have been selling sex robots and have delivered in caskets in Japan, repackaged for a new era. Whoa.
Yep.
Nothing new under the sun. This is ridiculous.
I remember seeing the little first one that they released over there too. Sickening.
Ew.
Exactly. Double ill.
It's just, this is too much for real.
So, I know, right? It's already 9:27. We haven't even touched the surface. Normally, women were supplied to the colonists by raking the streets of Paris for undesirables or by emptying the houses of correction. France also sent women convicted along with their dead or husbands, and in 1719 deported 209 women felons. So hold on, this number is not accurate. I'm gonna tell you why it's not accurate. Because when you go back to the hospital, it said there were over 10,000 people in the hospital. Why would you be raking the streets if you got 10,000 people? They basically sent 10,000 women and dumped them in New France.
There you go. Bye bye. Get busy now. Na 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 na.
This is making me wonder. Like the wheels are turning fast and hard in my head. I just keep thinking, how isn't there a narrative that they dropped off a whole bunch of Sioux on the land too, because Sioux are not indigenous to the Americas? Yeah.
Yep, they did.
I just keep thinking about like overlay stories.
Could these be the pigs?
Processing. I'm just
could these be the pigs carrying the diseases? Because it says that it was rat infested.
Hey, I'm just. Was some blankets in those caskets? Like, where are these smallpox blankets coming from?
I mean, this was in the 15. This is in the 15.
Hey, can't say that I got all the answers, but I'm
1700s. Lectio difficilio.
This is sounding real interesting to me.
Don't it though? So then it goes on to read that they were recruited from church charitable institutions, usually orphanages and convents, and although poor, were guaranteed to be virgins. Later became a matter of pride in Louisiana to show descent from them. So hold on. If you were swept off the streets and you were a prostitute, how you gonna guarantee somebody a virgin?
Thank you. Now you see the illicit sexual background of a lot of these institutions that are claiming piety.
Man, what you mean, y'all?
These sex scandals in the media today.
She said she was. Let me stop.
Do you promise on your honor you are a virgin? Yeah.
You know that's how it went. She said she was.
Like what? Coming fresh off the street. Stop it.
Fresh off the boat. FOBs.
Theater.
First of all, you're doing this for a living. This is your profession, your job.
Right.
What?
Okay, now that
I ain't that type of stupid. I'm sorry. Yeah, I have never been that type of stupid.
She said, I'm a virgin as of 2 minutes ago. I think that's what she said.
Oh, Doodle Vision says Madonna like a virgin.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, technically, she's a virgin to you. You haven't touched her. I guess that's what they meant.
Touched for the very first time in New France. Anyway.
This is terrible.
David Corey says the girl is mine. Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney. Okay, all right.
And then Paul, they're out like that. They're out.
Let's get back.
Man.
The first consignment reached Mobile in 1704, Biloxi in 1719, and New Orleans in 1728. Historian John Martin maintains that there is little documentation that casket girls considered among the ancestors of white French Creoles were brought to Louisiana. The Ursuline Order of Nuns supposedly chaperoned the casket girls until they married, but the order has denied they followed this practice. Martin suggests this was a myth and that interracial relationships occurred from the beginnings of the encounter among Europeans, Native Americans, and Afrikaners. She also writes that Creole families who today identify as white and ancestors during the colonial period who were African or multiracial and whose descendants married white over generations. So those are casket girls. Darian Wood says, I'm stuck on how they convinced us that we're the ones that were rounded up, put on boats by force, and brought here, when all I'm hearing is that it was them.
Exactly.
Shh, Darren, you ain't supposed to know that.
But not once, not twice, not 3 times.
Multiple
like
times.
6, 7 times. And every time it's them.
So that was Casket Girls. Okay. Then it says, now here's the important part. Through warfare and raids, Native American women were often captured to be traded, sold, or taken as wives. At first, the colony generally imported African men to use as slave labor. We know they talk about the Afrikaners and Slavs from Africa because of the heavy work of cleaning and develop plantations. Over time, it was imported African women, Slavs, as slaves. Marriage between the races was forbidden according to the Code Noir. So let's look at the Code Noir, which basically means black code.
Noir. Mm-hmm.
Noirs, thank you.
The Prince did black codes too? Oh, man.
Black codes like in South Carolina.
Yep.
So Code Noir was a decree originally passed by French King Louis XIV in 1685. The Code Noir defined the conditions of slavery in the French colonial empire, restricted the activities of freed Negroes, forbade the exercise of any religion other than Roman Catholicism, and ordered all Jews out of French colonies. Where was these Negroes coming from?
That's the first time I've heard the term
right,
Negro
this is the first time
all
you
of
heard
this
Negroes.
accounts.
Right?
Remember, you also got melanated Dutch and French and Germans at the same time.
That is true.
So they must be the darker complected Métis.
And let's keep it in context, because these are the Noir codes. So this sounds like all that paper bag test stuff you hear about.
Mm-hmm.
What it's kind of sounding like.
Yeah, and even before the Métis, remember before they left, any European that had a darker hue, they put in that category as Black Dutch or Black French.
Oh, yeah. I keep forgetting about them.
And David has a good point because he says Spain is where the Negro came from. I know the word for black is negro, so.
Wow. It says Code Noir resulted in a far higher percentage of blacks being free people of color. Okay, now it goes back to free people of color, which we know are the Métis, and we know are the different Dutch. It says they were, on average, exceptionally literate, with significant number of them being businesses, properties, and even Slavs. Owning businesses, properties, and even Slavs. The code has been described by Tyler Stovall as one of the most extensive official documents on race, slavery, and freedom ever drawn up in Europe. Doodle Vision says the remnant of the Issa had been venturing to Europe for centuries. Yeah, he said, Doodle Vision says the remnant of the Issa had been venturing to Europe for centuries. Okay. Yeah, that's something we can't forget, that the Issa had been venturing to Europe for centuries. So we know about it.
But Darian, that's why you found out most of them know their genealogy front to back.
Yeah, they know who they are. So that's the Code Noir. So it says over time it also imported African women as slaves. Marriage between the races were forbidden according to the Code Noir for the 18th century, but interracial sex continued. The upper class European men during this period often did not marry until their late 20s or early 30s. Premarital sex with an intended white bride. I'm about to say white bread. I'm sorry.
Slip of the tongue.
Let me try this again. Premarital sex with an intended white bride, especially if she was of high rank, was not permitted socially. Because again, like Free says, he wanted to have the perception of piety. I would never do that. Okay. Why I never?
But you did.
Well, she never in New France. She was all up in the whole thing.
Starting now.
Yeah, no.
Oh man, this is crazy.
So then it goes on to talk about the free people of color. So.
What Doodoo said, that's Victoria's Secret.
Oh, wee.
Skeletons in your closet. What's in your wallet?
We see you, Vicky.
White male colonists, often the younger sons of noblemen, military men, and planters, who needed to accumulate some wealth before they could marry, took women of color as consorts being married. Now remember, women of color were these métis. Or in some cases,
don't mean us.
Right. In some cases, after their first wives died, merchants and administrators also followed this practice if they were wealthy enough. When the women bore children, they were sometimes emancipated along with their children. Both the women and her children might take the surnames of the man. See, that's where you get the slavery of taking on a surname. That's where that comes from.
Yep.
Pamela Hall says, wait, what? Repeat, Bones?
What part?
I think
Victoria's Secret?
Either Victoria's Secret or when I was talking about the took women of color as consorts. Those women of color were not our women; they were the métis.
Yes. When they say people of color, they're not talking about us.
Victoria's Secret. Wasn't the love interest in the 80s Batman movie named Vicky Vale?
Vicky, what you got behind that veil? Never mind, put it back up.
It's a secret.
Somebody's on code.
Who need? I can't with that. Where am I reading? Okay, now I'm back. It says, when the women bore children, they were sometimes emancipated along with their children. Both the women and her children might take the surnames of the man. When Creole men reached an age when they were expected to marry, some also kept their relationships with their placées, but this was less common. A wealthy white man could have 2 or more families, one legal and the other not. Their mixed-race children became the nucleus of the class of free people of color, or gens de couleur libres, in Louisiana and Saint-Domingue. After the Haitian Revolution in the 18th and early 19th centuries, many refugees came to New Orleans, adding a new wave of French-speaking free people of color.
That just made me think.
What's that?
Now that phrase inferred makes a lot more sense now. When they had legal wives, then they would have another wife. Would the other wife be the inferred one? And those would be the inferred children now?
Yeah. It would have to be.
The left-hand marriage.
Yep.
Making the census look crazy when you look at it.
The hidden hand. Oh.
While some birth certificates, when you go back to the 18 and 1700s, you have a mother, but you don't know who the father is. The father's not listed.
The father signs an affidavit of parentage. This is interesting.
I know I have that in my genealogy.
This is very interesting.
Open up a whole lot of doors and windows to see clearer. Let the light in.
Right.
We gotta call it like it is. Some of us have Matisse in our family.
At the end of the day, it's all about getting it right. It's important to know who you are so you can get it right. We all have a responsibility and we all have accountability. And we all should be willing, able, and ready to stand up and take account and get it right. So, hey.
Golden Moon says, "Mama's baby, daddy's maybe."
Right, Golden. Mm-hmm.
So now it reads, both women and her children might take on the surnames of men. The Creole man reached the age. Okay, I already read that. It says their mixed race children became the nucleus of a class of free people of color, or gens de couleur libres, in Louisiana and Saint Dominique. After the Haitian Revolution in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, many refugees came to New Orleans, adding a new wave of French-speaking free people of color. During the period of French and Spanish rule, the gens de couleur came to constitute a third class in New Orleans and other former French cities, between the white Creoles and mass of black slaves. Black SLAVS. Métis. They had certain status and rights and often required education and property. Later, their descendants became leaders of New Orleans, holding political office in the city and state, and becoming part of what developed as the here's a straight up lectio difficilior. They holding political office in the city and state and becoming part of what developed as the African American middle class in the United States.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, they became known as the African American middle class, but they're not African.
Pause, freeze. At what point, it said that many of them required education and property, right?
Mm-hmm.
When did they give the slaves in the narrative that they give us education and property? Based on the narrative they give us, we were scratching and clawing for it. So obviously they're not talking about us. They have to be talking about the more melanated ones in their caste system that they created.
Exactly. Remember,
because they still would be Slav. A Slav.
Right.
Think about it. A black Dutch would still be a slave. He would still be a Slav.
Right.
He was just more melanated. Yep, he was more melanated than his brothers and sisters. So they separate them by the melanation, but they're still Slavs. And remember, they said a lot of the so-called Black Dutch or Black French, they went to the South and started settling with the Indians in the South, creating the so-called African American culture.
Right. And they, of course, would need land because, again, they're coming to a new land. They don't have established land here. So that's why they even wrote that into their history. And it's just crazy because when people just try to grab everything and all this is mine or none of this is mine, it's like you really can miss all these jewels in plain sight that can give you the true narrative. You just take the time to sort it out and piecemeal it together.
You got to remember, if you start looking at what happened in the 50s and 60s, a lot of the leaders, I mean, let's be real, a lot of the leaders in the civil rights era were not really melanated. They were Huguenots. Think of
mulattoes, Métis. Even with the W. Du Bois, what did he say? What did he say he identified as? A mulatto, a Métis? Out his own mouth.
Yep. Now you see why. And look where he was in terms of like position and opportunity to influence. Remember what it was saying earlier. They had the ability, the right to vote, and the right to exclude others from voting. So in context, you can see why his position was what it was and why he was yoked with who he was yoked to. And then look at where the whole civil rights movement has us sitting today. And it really makes a lot of sense to me.
Classes within classes within classes eventually spilled over into our community when we were kicked off our reservations, or the status of our reservations changed, and then we had to quote unquote rough a couple. Or we got kicked out of
we
our
just
business.
sit languishing at the end of the day. That's all it is. Like, we're languishing on our own land. And that's why we can't have the mindset that anybody's going to come and help us or save us. No, we have the ability to do what we need to do. Remember who we are. Find yourself. Find your voice and use it. Change your community.
Exactly.
Wouldn't these melanated French still be in line with the Huguenots and the Protestant church? So why wouldn't they be willing to be the hands that lead us astray?
And they're the ones that started your secret societies.
Because they know they know we're not the same people. They know we look alike. They know they can come among us and get us to follow them, but they know we're not the same people. Because even when these people speak, they speak against us. They always trying to make sure that they're not lumped in with us. They let that be known.
And it makes me think about something. And it's like, and I don't really, I try not to follow popular culture and what's going on in the news, but it seems like I hear a lot of our sisters lamenting about how these melanated comedian men and actors, once they get to a certain status, it's like they have to go on record as denouncing dark-skinned women before they ascend. That sounds like some fraternal vow, if you ask me.
If the children take on the title of their mother, how do you knock down a whole class of people? You deteriorate the value of their women.
Wow.
Because now what do the children worth? If the children value is dictated upon the mother, if you make the mother worthless, now what are the children?
So at the end of the day, what we're seeing is, you got to remember, because it's going to talk about these boys being sent to France to be schooled. What else are they being schooled in? Are they being schooled in the ways of the truth and deception and secret societies, and coming back to New France and then eventually Canada, then eventually America, to start these new secret societies to then recruit individuals based off of oaths to continue to carry out what it is they've been carrying out so far? Just a thought.
It's tying into a lot of our earlier builds, making a whole lot make sense. Becomes clearer and clearer.
Copper India says he's just going to say, watch Brother Steve Coakley's work. So then it goes on to read that he often kept a second address in the city to use his entertaining and socializing among the white elite. He had built or bought a house for his placée and their children. She and her children were part of the Society of Creoles of Color. The white world might not recognize the placées as a wife legally and socially, but she was recognized as such among the Creoles of color. Some of the women acquired SLAVS and plantations, particularly during the Spanish colonial era. A woman might be listed as owning SLAVS. These were sometimes relatives whom she intended to free after earning enough money to buy their freedom. While in New Orleans or other cities, the men would cohabitate with the placée as an official boarder at her Creole cottage, or house. Many were located near Rampart Street in New Orleans. There was once the demarcation line or wall between the city and the frontier. Other popular neighborhoods for Creoles of color.
That's a brothel. I'm sorry, I couldn't hold it anymore. That's a brothel. Call it what it is.
Because it's on the outskirts, right?
This fluff and flair. Oh my goodness. I apologize. Continue.
They think now. Real fancy now.
Stop it.
Well, if you think about it, they had to be brothels because remember they emptied the daggone basically, for lack of a better term, the prostitute hospital in France, and moved them here. So these women had to go somewhere and do something.
Right. And in Hollywood, they always give you the storyline, but they put it in the West with the saloons and the brothels. So come on now.
Moulin Rouge, that's all I'm saying. Moulin Rouge, that's all I'm saying.
Lady Marmalade.
Yeah, Frenchie.
All right. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you good. It says other popular neighborhoods for Creoles of color were the Faubourg Marginais and the Trémé. If the man was not married, he might keep a separate residence, preferably next door or in the same or next block as his placée. He often took part in an arranged for the upbringing and education of the children. For a time, both boys and girls were educated in France, as there were no schools in New Orleans for mixed race children. That's where we start talking about the mixed race children being basically ousted or left out and having to go back to France, Europe, or some other countries. It says that supporting such a placée arrangement ran into thousands of dollars per year. It was limited to the wealthy. Remember, so basically you're talking about Huguenots.
Creating another class.
Inheritance and work. Upon the death of her protector, the placée and her family could, on legal challenge, expect up to a third of the man's property. Some white lovers tried and succeeded in making their mixed race children primary heirs over other white descendants or relatives. A notable inheritance case was the daughter of Nicolas Maria Vidal, a former high official in Spanish Louisiana, who with their mother, Euphrosyne Hisnard, successfully petitioned the U.S. government in the 1830s to intercede on their behalf to secure a portion of Vidal's estate. The women in these relationships often worked to develop assets, acquiring property, running a legitimate rooming house, or a small business as a hairdresser, marchand, female street or country merchant, or a seamstress. She could also become a placée to another white Creole. She sometimes taught her daughters to become placées by education and informal schooling and dress. Etiquette. That was my word, etiquette. I put that there.
What was their name called? They had a name for that. Where you would have a woman and she over other women.
Hold on, a madam.
Chaperone.
Doodle Vision says now, I'll watch you play Columbo, Picasso, tricks inside colossals, turn your castles to brothels. He says, Lil Kim, I can love you better with Mary J. Blige. Oh, that was a lyric he was, okay.
Whoa. I said it earlier. Artists are given songs because the songs shape the perspective of the people that they're talking to.
Who did the remix?
Who did the remix?
On the Marmalade remix, wasn't it Lil Kim?
Oh yeah.
Missy.
I see your face, and I can't think of her name.
Christina
Aguilera.
Surrounded by a bunch of melanated
Maya, I
women.
want to say.
Yeah, Christina Aguilera and some melanated women.
Oak Cliff said horse. On that one,
thanks, Superfly.
We gotta clear the blast area. Oh yeah, Superfly's chick said Maya. Oh yeah, can't forget Maya. I'm gonna clear the blast area on that one. Clear the blast area. Clear the blast area. Clear the blast area. One time for your mind. One time for your soul. One more time before we all get old. I'm done.
Get down there.
Oh no. Doodle Vision said LaBelle was a group of prostitutes. Sorry, Patty.
Yep.
I'm
LaBelle. Adela.
I'm defibrillator. I know it's a word. We have a hospital close by. Hold on.
Yeah, I learned that one a long time ago.
Oh, but wait,
Whoa.
there's more. We're gonna find out what we're gonna find out. Hold on now. Hold on. We ain't finished digging. The women.
Not sorry.
I know the women in these relationships often work to develop assets, acquire property, run a legitimate rooming house, or a small business as hairdresser. Mashar. So then it talks about she taught her daughters to become placées by education and informal schooling and dress, comportment, and ways to behave. A mother negotiated with a young man for the dowry or property settlement, sometimes by contract, for her daughter if a white Creole were interested in her. A former placée could also marry a cohabitant with a Creole man of color and have more children.
Doesn't that sound like a marriage license? I'm just saying.
Exactly what it is. It's a contract. But it was an arranged marriage based off of your financial standing. So watch how they try to clean this up. This is the funny part. Contrary to popular misconceptions, placées were not and did not become prostitutes. Creole men of color objected to the practice as denigrating the virtue of Creole women of color, but some, as descendants of white males, benefited by the transfer of social capital. Martin writes, they did not choose to live in concubinage. What they chose was to survive. Wow. Dudavisions wrote something in French, and then he translates, do you want to go to bed with me tonight? Oh, that's what that word meant when Patty and them was singing that song.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's what it means. Yes, it's a prostitute song. A real lady mama lauded that. Once you know what that means.
We talk about, you know what? That's disappointing, Patty, and the crew, and the remix. Come on, ladies. What is this?
What is this? I can't believe this.
Oh, this is crazy.
Contrary to pop, okay, so it says in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, after Reconstruction and with reassertion of white supremacy across the former Confederacy, the white Creole historians Charles Guerrier and Alcée Fortier wrote histories that did not address placage in much detail. They suggested that little race mixing had occurred during the colonial period and that the placées had seduced or led white Creole men astray. Of course they did. They wrote that French Creoles, in the sense of having long been native to Louisiana, were ethnic Europeans who were threatened by the specter of race mixing like other southern whites. Guerrier, when younger, was said to have taken a woman of color as his placée, and she had their children. So to his later shame, he married a white woman later in life. His early experience inspired his novel, Fernando de Lemos. Dudavision says, why do you think she strutted like a peacock?
Look how they dress in lingerie.
Oak Cliff, you are so right. She says that's why her grandmother didn't allow her to wear red lipstick and rouge. Man, that was like a big no-no back in the day. I ain't care what shade you put on, but you better not put no rouge on your mouth.
That's the color of them street people, them street walkers.
That's exactly what you would hear, which to us would just sound like, what?
Red light district, red lipstick.
Man. Oh, TLC even did a red light special song. I'm disappointed. Ladies.
That red light district.
I'm disappointed. Lady of Red. Oh, Cliff said red dress.
And think about it, when we were younger, you wouldn't hear this stuff on radio. You had to own the record to hear it. It was as you got older, music switched and it started bombarding this foolishness to your brain.
So then they have notable placées. So they got Marie Theresa Bautier, Eulalie de Mandeville, Rosé Rochan, and I'm gonna read this because everybody knows this name, Marie Laveau. And Doodle Vision reads, there's still a red light district in Frankfurt, Germany.
Yep. Think about it. It's legal in their culture. Look at Amsterdam.
Reminds me of saying, a hamster? Damn. I'm just saying. My bad.
Well, where is prostitution legal here?
It's not. Well, Utah and Vegas. On the outskirts. I'm sorry.
Wow. Nothing new under the sun. New France stretched along. Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, this is really wild.
So Marie Laveau, known as the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, was born between 1795 and 1801. As the daughter of a white Haitian plantation owner, Charles Laveau, and his mixed black and Indian placée.
Say that again, one more time. He was a what?
She was a voodoo
He was
queen.
A what Haitian?
A white Haitian plantation owner.
Okay.
Charles Laveau, and his mixed black and Indian placée, Marguerite d'Arcanteuil, or d'Arcanteuil, because there were so many whites as well as free people of color in Haiti with the same names. Laveau could also have been a free man of color who owned SLAVS and property as well. All three may have escaped Haiti along with thousands of other Creole whites and Creoles of color during the slave uprising that accumulated in the French colonies, becoming the only independent black republic in the world. At 17, Marie married a Creole man of color popularly known as Jacques Petit. However, in some documents, he is known as Santiago Petit. Petit either died, disappeared, or deliberately abandoned her. Oh wow, that's a broad range, right?
Right.
He died, disappeared, or deliberately abandoned her. The 3 Ds.
It's like an adventure book.
We don't know what happened. Nobody knows. He just up and
Part
disappeared.
1, 2, and 3.
Right, he gone at the end of the day.
Some accounts also relate that he was a merchant seaman or a sailor in the Navy. After she produced a daughter, okay, he says he abandoned after she produced a daughter, okay. Laveau was styling herself as the widow Petit and was a hairdresser for white matrons. She
food products.
Yeah, she was also a she was also reckoned to be an herbalist and a yellow fever nurse. When she met Louis Christophe Dumesnil de Galpion, and in the early 1820s they became lovers. Marie was just beginning her spectacular career as a voodoo practitioner. She would not be declared queen until about 1830, and Dumesnil de Glapion was a 50-ish white Creole veteran of the Battle of New Orleans, with relatives on both sides of the color line. Recently, it has been alleged that Dumesnil de Glapion was so in love with Marie, he refused to live separately from his placée according to racial custom. In an unusual decision, Dumesnil de Glapion passed as a man of color in order to live with her under respectable circumstances, thus explaining the confusion many historians have had whether he was truly white or black. Although it is popularly thought that Marie presented Dumesnil de Glapion with 15 children, only 5 are listed in vital statistics, and of these, 2 daughters. One, the famous Marie Echarste, or Marie Laveau II, lived to adulthood. Maria Echarste closely resembled her mother and startled many who thought that Marie Laveau had been resurrected by the black arts, or could be at 2 places at once, beliefs that the daughter did little to correct. And it goes on to say, Sebastul, which is the name of the plantation house and property, was built and cultivated by Don Pedro Morin in the 1830s in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana. It was bought 20 years later by Colonel Ignatius Szymanski, a Polish American who later served in the Confederate Army, and renamed Sebastul. At his death, Colonel Szymanski willed this estate to his placée, Eliza Romaine, a free woman of color, and to their son, John Szymanski. Really, Free? You wonder if that's where beauty shop gossip started?
Well, I was actually responding to what Lady J said. She said she used blackmail. Let me see. She just blackmailed people. That is how she got power, because they would tell her their business. And I remember reading about her before, and I did read something along those lines. So I was just saying to her, I wonder if that's where beauty shop gossip started.
Would make sense. You get information on people.
And then you use it against them. So that sense of blackmail, yeah, that could be very powerful within a small community. So based on how things were set up and how they were doing business, I can see why, yeah, that could be a little ace up her sleeve.
You let this person put their hands in your head. So yeah, you telling them some stuff.
So this is the one thing I want to go over before we end. Looking at the free people of color, I said if we look at the Plaçage and then you look at free people of color, the stories are the same, but the narration is different. Knowing what we know now about the hospitals being emptied and there being prostitutes released into New Orleans, Canada, Louisiana, and other places, let's look at what the narrative for free people of color are. I'll put this in the chat. And remember, this is the same time period. Okay, it says, in the context of history of slavery in Americas, free people of color, French gens de couleur libres and Spanish gente de couleur libre, were people of mixed African and European descent who were not enslaved. The term rose from French colonies including La Louisiane and settlements of the Caribbean islands, such as Saint Dominique, Haiti, Saint Lucia, Dominica, Guadeloupe, and Martinique, where a distinct group of free people of color developed. Freed African slaves were included in the term enfranchised, but historically they were considered as distinct from the free people of color. In these territories, major cities, particularly New Orleans, and those cities held by the Spanish, a substantial third class of primarily mixed race free people of color developed. These colonial societies classify a mixed race of people in a variety of ways, generally related to the visible features and to the proportion of African society. Listen, racial classifications were numerous in Latin America. Then it goes on to talk about the term "gens de couleur" was commonly used in France West Indies colonies prior to the abolition of slavery, where it was a short form of gens de couleur libres, free people of color. It refers specifically to free people of mixed race, primarily African and European. Now, if you listen and pay attention, listen to how they're painting this narrative now, and it's going to paint a different picture as I continue to read. In the 13 colonies settled by the British, later to become the United States, the term freed Negroes was often used to cover the same class of people. Boom! Listen to what I'm telling you. The 13 colonies settled by the British, later to become the United States, the term freed Negro was often used to cover the same class of people. You hear that? You hear that? Those who were legally free and visible of ethnic African descent, many were people of mixed race, freed because of relations to their masters or other whites. By the late 18th century, the Upper South included many slaves of mixed race. Among the most well-known is Sally Hemings, who was a slave held by Thomas Jefferson and considered his concubine, aka placée. She was 3/4 white and a half sister of his late wife, which basically means his wife was métisse. There are 4 surviving Hemings children were born into slavery because of their status.
Hold up.
Wait.
His first wife and second wife is half sisters. Okay, I just want to make sure. Everybody seen the picture of his first wife and the second wife, right? Oh, okay, just making sure.
And if you don't, can somebody pull up a picture of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson's wife? As adults, 3 passed into white society and increasingly married white in later generations. Now it goes on to talk about Saint Dominique. Now remember, we had already talked about placage. This is the same thing. They're just talking about it from a 13 colonies, quote unquote, England perspective, which is nothing more than Huguenots acting under the guise of English. By the late 18th century, By the late 18th century, prior to the Haitian Revolution, Saint Dominique was legally divided into 3 distinct groups: free whites, who were divided socially between the plantation classes, grand blancs, and the working class, petit blancs, freedmen, enfranchised. Remember that term, and SLAVS. More than half the enfranchised were gens de couleur libres. Remember that term? Others were considered free black slaves. In addition, maroons, runaway slaves, were sometimes able to establish independent small communities and a kind of freedom in the mountains, along with the remnants of the Haitians' original Taino people. Remember, those people that went to the mountains were who? Cajuns or the Melungeons. When slavery was ended in the colony of 1793 by the action of the French government following the French Revolution, there were approximately 28,000 anciens libres, free before, in Santo Domingue. The term was used to distinguish those who were already free compared to those liberated by the General Emancipation of 1793. About 16,000 of these anciens libres were gens de couleur libres, métis. Another 12,000 were affranchis, another version of métis, but now they call them black slaves, who had either purchased their freedom or had been given it by their masters for various reasons. Okay. Then it goes on to say, regardless of their ethnicity in Santo Domingo, Frenchmen had been able to own land. Some acquired plantations and owned large numbers of SLAVs themselves. The SLAVs were generally not friendly with the freedmen, who sometimes betrayed themselves to whites as bulwarks against a Slav uprising. The property owners, freedmen, tended to support distinct lines set between their own class and that of SLAVs. Also, often others as artisans, shopkeepers, and landowners. The gens de couleur frequently became quite prosperous and only primed themselves on their European culture and descent. They were often well educated in the French language, and they tended to scorn the Haitian Creole language used by the Slavs. Most gens de couleur were reared as Roman Catholic, also part of French culture. and many denounced the Vodun religion brought with the Slavs from Africa. Under the Asian regime, despite the provisions of equity nominally establishing the Code Noir, the gens de couleur were limited in their freedoms. They did not possess the same rights as white Frenchmen, specifically the right to vote. Most supported slavery on the island, and at least up until the time of the French Revolution. But they saw equal rights for free people of color, which became an early central issue of the unfolding of the Haitian Revolution. Remember, we're still talking about different levels of métis and mixed races. The primary adversary of the gens de couleur before and into the Haitian Revolution were the poor white farmers and tradesmen of the colony known as petits blancs, small whites, because of the freedmen's relative economic success in the region, sometimes related to blood ties to influential whites. The petits blancs farmers often resented their social standing and worked to keep them shut out of government. Beyond financial incentives, the free colors caused the poor whites further problems in finding women to start a family. Remember that? The successful mulattoes often won the hands of small number of ineligible women on the island. With growing resentment, the working class whites monopolized assembly participation and caused the free people of color to look to France for legislative assistance. It talks about the French citizenship. The free people of color won a major political battle on May 15, 1791, when National Assembly of France voted to give full French citizenship to men of color. The decree restricted citizenship to those persons who had two free parents. The free people of color were encouraged, and many petits blancs were enraged. Fighting broke out in Saint Dominique over exercising the National Assembly's decree. This turmoil played into the Slav revolts of the island. Okay, let me see. So here we go. In this competition for power, both poor whites and free colors enlisted the help of Slavs. By doing this, the feud helped to disintegrate the color discipline and propelled the Slav population into colony to seek further inclusion and liberties in society. As a widespread slave rebellion in the north of the island wore on, many free people of color abandoned their earlier distances from the Slavs. A growing coalition between the free colors and the former Slavs were essential for the eventual succession of the Haitians to expel French influence. The former Slavs and the ancient Libres still remained segregated in many respects. The animosity and struggle for power erupted in 1799. The competition between the gens de couleur, led by André Rigaud, and the black Haitians, led by Toussaint Louverture, evolved into a war of the knives. After the loss in the conflict, many wealthy gens de couleur left as refugees to France, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the United States, and elsewhere. Some took Slavs with them. Others, however, remained to play an influential role in Haitian politics. So now let's look at New Orleans and La Louisiane. Okay. Free people of color played an important role in the history of New Orleans and the southern area of La Louisiane, both when the area was controlled by the French and the Spanish and after acquisition by the United States as part of Louisiana Purchase. When French settlers and traders first arrived in these colonies, the men frequently took Native American women as their concubines or common law wives. See Margerie à la Faconde du Pays. When African slaves were imported to the colony, the colonists took African women as concubines or slaves. In the colonial period of French and Spanish rule, men tended to marry later after becoming financially established. Stop. Do y'all see how this story is being overlaid? And the terms are being changed?
Yep. Are they trying to place African over Indian?
African over Indian and Creole over Métis and those things. So just pay attention to this. Now watch the switch. Later, when more white families had settled and developed here, some young Frenchmen or ethnic French Creoles still took mixed race women as mistresses, known as placées, before they officially married. The free people of color developed formal arrangements for placées, which the young women's mothers negotiated. Under the system of placage, Often the mothers arranged a kind of dowry of property transfer to their daughters, including freedom for them and their children if the young women were still enslaved, and the education of the children. The French Creole men often paid for education of their natural, illegitimate, mixed-race children from these relationships, especially if they were sons, generally sending them to France to be educated. Some of these sons entered the military, such as the father of writer Alexandre Dumas. At Saint Dominique, the free people of color developed a separate class between the colonial French and Spanish and a mass of enslaved black African workers. They often achieved education, practiced artisan trades, and gained some measure of wealth. They spoke French and practiced Catholicism. Many also developed syncretic Christianity. At one time, the center of their residential community in New Orleans was the French Quarter. Many were artisans who owned property and their own businesses. They formed a social category distinct from both whites and slaves, and maintained their own society into the period after the United States annexation. Some historians suggest that free people of color made New Orleans the cradle of the civil rights movement in the United States. They achieved more rights than did free people of color of free blacks in the British slave colonies, including serving in the armed militia after the United States acquired Louisiana Territory. Creoles in New Orleans and the region worked to integrate the military en masse. William C. Claiborne, appointed by Thomas Jefferson, was governor of the territory of New Orleans, formally accepted delivery of the French colony on 20 December 1803. Free men of color had been armed members of the militia for decades during both Spanish and French rule in colony of Louisiana. Then talks about their pledge and talks about them being part of the militia. So now we talk about definition, which I find interesting. Okay.
But before you do that for a second,
go ahead.
There's something that popped out. They try to tell you that these men started taking so-called African women, right?
Mm-hmm.
As wives.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you do that if they don't own no land? How can an African woman transfer land and a dowry for her daughter?
Mm-hmm.
Who are they trying to fool?
Now think about
it. And also, why does it say black African workers? Mm-hmm. I mean, they talking about two different people.
This is the same story, but after the Louisiana Purchase. Same story. Same exact story after the Louisiana Purchase.
Phantoms and duplicates in history.
So then it goes on and says there was relatively little manumission of slaves until after the Revolution. Throughout the slave societies of America, some slave owners took advantage of the power relationships to use female slaves sexually. Sometimes they exerted relationships of concubinage. However, in the English-speaking colonies, the children of these relationships were not usually emancipated. South Carolina diarist Mary Chestnut wrote in the mid-19th century that, like the patrons of old, our men live all in one house with their wives and their concubines, and the mulattoes one sees in every family exactly resembles the white children. In some places, especially in French and Spanish, Caribbean, and South American slave societies, the ethnic European father might acknowledge the relationship and his children. Some were common law marriage and affection. Slaveholders were more likely to free their mixed race children of these relationships than they were to free the other slaves. They also sometimes freed the enslaved women who were their concubines. Many slave societies allowed masters to free their slaves. As the population of color became larger and white ruling class felt more threatened by potential instability, they worked through their government to increase restrictions on manumissions. These usually included taxes requirements that some social useful reason be cited for manumission, and a requirement that a newly freed person demonstrate means of independent support. Masters might free their slaves for a variety of reasons, but the most common was family relationship between master and slave. Slaves sometimes gained their freedom by purchasing it when allowed to save some portion of earnings if leased out or selling produce. The master determined if had to pay market or reduced value. In other cases, relatives who were already free and earning money purchased the freedom of another. Sometimes masters or the government would free slaves without payment as a reward for some notable service. A slave who revealed slave conspiracies for uprisings was sometimes rewarded with freedom. Many people who lived as free with the slave society did not have formal liberty papers, and in some cases these were refugees, who hid in the towns among free people of color and tried to maintain a low profile. In other cases, they were living as free with the permission of the master, sometimes in return for payment of the rent and share of money they earned by trades. The masters never made their freedom official. So let me see. Let's see something. This is a lot. I'm trying to get to a point. They even got the Nat Turner revolts in here, which we know at best is questionable. So let's look at the economic influence. It reads, free people of color filled an important niche in the economy of slave societies. In most places, they worked as artisans and small retail merchants in the towns. In many places, especially in British-influenced colonies such as southern United States, there were restrictions on people of color owning slaves and agricultural land, but many free blacks lived in the countryside, and some became major slaveholders. In the antebellum years, individual slaves who were freed often stayed on or near the plantations where they or their ancestors had been slaves, and where they had extended family. Masters often used free blacks as plantation managers or overseers, especially if the master had a family relationship with their mixed-race man. In the early 19th century, societies required apprenticeships for free blacks to ensure they developed a means of support. For instance, in North Carolina by the late 1830s, when the country courts could apprentice orphans, fatherless, abandoned children, illegitimate children, and free black children whose parents were not employed. However, the number of apprenticeships declined as the number of free blacks increased. In some southern states, after the Nat Turner Slave Rebellion in 1831, the legislature passed laws that forbade the teaching free blacks of slaves to read and write, which was a requirement for having an apprenticeship. There was a fear if blacks would read and write, they might start slave revolts and rebellion, which I always found stupid because you're going to beat me, you're gonna put me in chains, and you're going to hold me against my will. That ain't going to make me want to kill you. But the moment I learn how to read, then I'm going to kill you. That don't make any sense. Anyway, blacks were not allowed to apprentice as an editor or work in printing presses. Despite the restrictions of some apprenticeships, many free blacks benefited from their time in the apprentice. Caribbean colonies governments sometimes hired free blacks of color as rural police to hunt down runaway slaves and keep order among the slave population. From the view of the white master's class in place of such as Saint Dominique or Jamaica, this was a critical function in society in which the population of enslaved people on large plantations vastly outnumbered whites. In place of the law, social customs permitted it. Some free people of color managed to acquire good agriculture and slaves and become planters themselves. Free blacks owned plantations in almost all slave societies of the Americas. United States free people of color may have owned the most property in Louisiana, as French and Spanish colony had developed distinct Creole and mixed race classes before its acquisition by the United States. A man who had a relationship with a woman of color often also arranged for a transfer of wealth to her and their children, whether through deed or land or property to the mother or child under the system of placage, or by arranging for an apprenticeship for a trade to a mixed race children, which provided them a better opportunity to make a skilled living, or by educating sons in France and easing their way into the military. In Saint Dominique, by the late colonial age, gens de couleur owned about 1/3 of the land and about 1/4 of the SLAVS, mostly in the southern part of the island. Again, this is nothing more than taking what happened in New France and placing it over top of what happened after the Louisiana Purchase. It's the same story. Then it says, when the end of slavery came, the distinction between former free colors and former slaves persisted in some societies because of advantages, social capital of education and experience. Free people of color often became leaders of the newly freed people in Saint Dominique. Toussaint Louverture had gained freedom before he became a leader in the slave rebellion, but he is not believed to have been a mixed race. The United States In the United States, many of the African Americans elected as state and local officials during Reconstruction in the South had been free in the South before the Civil War. Other new leaders were educated men of color from the North, whose families had long been free and who sent to the South to work and help the freedmen. Some were elected to office. Then it goes on to read, today, many descendants of the gens de couleur, or free people of color of the Louisiana area, celebrate their culture and heritage through a New Orleans-based Louisiana Creole Research Association, La Creole. The term Creole is not synonymous with free people of color or gens de couleur libre, but many members of La Creole have traced their genealogies through those lines. Today, the multiracial descendants of the French and Spanish colonists, Africans, and other ethnicities are widely known as Louisiana Creole. Louisiana's governor, Bobby Jindal, signed an Act 276 on 14 June 2013, creating the prestige license plate, I'm Creole, honoring Louisiana Creoles' contributions to the heritage. Then it says the terms Creole and Cajun have sometimes been confused in Louisiana, as members of each group generally had ancestors who were French-speaking, but the terms were not synonymous. The Cajuns were descendants of French colonists from Acadia in eastern Canada, who were resettled to Louisiana in the 18th century, generally outside the New Orleans area. Generations later, some of their culture relates to that of the Louisiana Creoles, but they are distinct. Members of each group may be multi-ethnic.
Question. If the mass of the population in the South is supposed to be slaves and uneducated, who voted these melanated politicians into office?
And what happened to all? And what happened to all those métis that were there after the sale of the Louisiana? So the Louisiana Purchase happened and everybody left. Is that what you're saying? All these prostitutes left. Did their descendants left? Come on, man, get out of here.
Couldn't be. The culture, the standards of the culture is still there to this day. Traditions are still there.
Truth.
Cajuns and Creoles are still there. They just put everybody in two classes, black and white. That's all America did.
Right, and they took the story that happened in New France and overlaid it and what happened after the Emancipation Proclamation and the Louisiana Purchase and Emancipation Proclamation, because all they did was told you the same story. They just now added, what do you call it? Made everybody black, or they changed the definition of black.
Wow. It makes sense why that whole black culture and Africa being brought to you, how this all happened just like a whirlwind, just one day. It's just like in your face. And then it's being taught to you within movies. Think about the beginning of Boys in the Hood. You get taught within a movie when young Trey goes up to the blackboard, starts pointing at Africa and all this.
Now think about this.
It's crazy.
Think about this. Why are they giving credit to New Orleans for being the cradle of the civil rights movement? And we think about what happened in Mobile, Alabama, right? Wasn't Mobile actually a capital of Louisiana at one particular time?
Yes, it was.
When it was New France. So these black SLAVS, these emancipated black SLAVS, were the civil rights leaders.
Makes sense in perspective now, especially again, like I said earlier, in terms of how far we've gotten. I mean, it makes sense. Sad but true. Now, does the phrase that everybody who looks like you is not you, does that make more sense?
It
They can
should.
blend in too. They can blend into our culture real easily.
Yeah, Pamela, I'm not showing any issues on my system. Um,
I'm not either, but El Boyer says he's buffering as well.
yeah. Right, Macadon want all skin folk and kin folk, and that's crucial. That's why you
I'll go
The
question,
back to the
mindset.
story.
right?
I was about to say, I'll go back to the story of the Black Dutch. A lot of them went to the South and intermingled with a lot of our relatives in the South because it's easier for them to blend in.
Mhm. If those Black Dutch came from Africa and were dealing with the Afrikaneers, and they were considered Black Africans or Black Slavs,
Is that you? I mean, if it's you, but is it you? And is it you based on the story that they've given you?
or is it you based on your genealogy?
Right. Is it you? And if not, shake that off. Don't wear that. Find your truth, find your voice. Change your world. Starts with you.
But that it starts to explain why some people don't want to do their genealogy, because maybe they know and they don't want nobody else to know.
True.
Doodle Vision says everything West Black Dutch, son.
Whoa. Hmm.
Yeah, because we know the African and the Afrikaneers split their class into two.
What's their MO? They have a caste system everywhere they go.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's easy to get lost in some of these labels that they keep attaching to different people groups.
And Spike Lee broke down one of the most basic class systems that we fell into, the fraternities and sororities.
Correct.
The introduction to your secret societies. And that's not to say or intimate that everybody belongs to a fraternity or sorority belongs to a secret society. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that's an introduction. Because what it does is it preps you for that camaraderie and following those rituals. And depending on how ritualistically you are inclined to do something and how much you love it, I can see how someone can end up going even further, becoming masons and things of that nature. And then becoming part of the boule. It's not hard.
Golden Moon said it perfect. Germany, let me see your paperwork. I can't tell who you are.
That's fact. That boy says it's stupid. I can't even see this without the circle popping up, spinning every 2 seconds after hearing half a sentence.
Refresh.
Yeah, sorry that you. Yeah, El Boy has to keep refreshing. Sorry you have to deal with it. It might be the area that you're in, or if you're using your device and you're in an area where there are lots of Wi-Fi, you might want to take it off of Wi-Fi because it might be searching, and just use your data if it allows you to. If they're not going to charge you.
Yeah, and if you haven't refreshed, then just go ahead and do that. Usually that'll stop that problem. At least it's been that way in my experience. Hope that helps.
So, I mean, but this definitely makes sense, and it puts a nice little picture so we can see who we're dealing with. We know who the Africans are. We know who the African Americans are. We know who the African Slavs are.
And And don't let those words trigger you. Like, don't fall back into the mindset that was given to you just because you hear one of those words in a sentence. When you see slave, just remember they added an E and it didn't change the definition. So say Slav instead and see how differently the information looks to you.
Mm-hmm. Because with that definition of slave, there's an intent which goes into the Emancipation Proclamation, which we'll have to cover tomorrow rising. So,
Sounds good.
wow.
Just know that we were built for this at the end of the day. Like, we were meant to figure all of this out. And we're going to. So don't get discouraged. I know sometimes in some of these studies, it could get, tiresome or seem kind of redundant. But I encourage all of you, like, get into groups of like-minded people and start talking about some of this information and start building and watch what happens.
I mean, the best
key word is like-minded people. Otherwise, you just end up with a bunch of bickering or, I'm not saying that everybody has to agree with what you say. Don't get it twisted. When I say like-minded, I mean in terms of like intellect and perspective and even drive. And watch what happens. It makes a difference.
Yeah. People that are looking to do something. People that are looking to do something for their community. People that are looking to help, not just get in chats and groups and talk about other people and cause you to raise suspicion against somebody because they're saying something that goes against what they're saying. Those people are divisive. We always encourage you to question anything that we put out because, again, we want to get it right. It's not about being right. And those people that are always trying to create these additional back chats to have these little side groups to talk about and discredit people, the question you need to ask them is, are you man or are you woman enough to bring this to this person to their face with me listening? Because obviously you're man or woman enough to create this back chat. So be man or woman enough to bring it to their face so we can have a discussion if there's an issue. If not, then quite honestly, you're worse than a Huguenot. Because you're assimilating and making yourself seem like you're one of us when your intention is to divide, to conquer, to hide, and be a coward. Who are you? Are you going to hide behind these back chats? Are you going to hide behind these videos? Or are you going to show your face and show who you are, have a conversation and expose the truth when it's time for the truth to be exposed? At the end of the day, your actions will always tell them. Always. Especially when there's no one to vouch for you.
That is true. And as a alternative, somebody comes to you, you always have the option to just really go about your business and be about your studies. I know like a lot of people just don't have time for the rigmarole. I know I don't. So find those like-minded groups of people, and hopefully, we'll be able to do some even more builds like on the forum, because I think that that's a perfect spot, just to get some of that intellectual work flowing.
Most definitely. And Lady J, we definitely appreciate you too, because without the chat and without the individuals that tune in to listen, what's the point of us being here? You're just talking. I mean, the goal is to help people. The goal is to expose people to information so that they will in turn take this information that we bring to them as we learn and build together and go out and investigate and then use it and then do something with it. And then come back and let us know what the results were. And then allow us to help the community. At the end of the day, it doesn't do us any good to have a YouTube channel if we're not offering solutions and if we're not helping. What's the point? There are millions of YouTube channels and all they do is spit rhetoric and have no solution. Or they say they have a solution and you don't see one. Or they say they have a solution and they give third-party references of what they're doing, but they have no proof. Saying you have a solution, not showing you have a solution, is not a solution. Saying what you've done and nobody can vouch what you've done, that's conjecture. That doesn't even hold up in a court of any law. I don't care if it's your own personal law. I don't care if it's in the hood. I don't care if it's in the court here or anywhere else. Who can vouch for what you do? See, that's what makes YouTube the way that it is, because most people don't ask these quote-unquote YouTube celebrities to prove what they're saying. We treat them as juggernauts, and then we take stuff on face value and offer a blind devotion, and then end up looking crazy.
That's the definition.
No.
Everybody needs to prove who they are and prove what they do. Don't just take it on face value. And it doesn't matter if they belong to a tribe, or it doesn't matter if they have their Indian card, or it doesn't matter if, there's some high-ranking official on a council. It don't matter. Show and prove. Show and prove. Because it's easy to hide when you got to be out in front of everybody and someone asks you them hard questions like, where were you? What were you doing? Can you explain this document? Now that's something totally different.
Sitting on vital information. Not prudent, not wise, not in a time like this.
Dudavision says, yep, people treat them like juggernauts when they're actually jugheads. Jugheads, turncoats, tattletales, snitches.
Well, that whole sense of blind devotion, like that's what religion requires a lot of times. There's a difference between having a spiritual connection and being religious. And you know what that whole sense of religion, we talked about that. So having a blind devotion, you can have a blind devotion to a lot of different things. You can say all day long, like, I'm not about a religion. But if you expect blind devotion, I mean, I don't know. That sounds a little cult-like to me personally, but that's just my personal opinion. Let's just get the work done.
Exactly. Let's get to work. So it's been phenomenal. We definitely appreciate those in the chat. Appreciate those listening. Appreciate the new subscribers. Appreciate everybody. Appreciate the panel. As always, it's always an honor and a privilege. As always, ladies first. Free. Drop some jewels on them before you head off into the sunset or to the rising.
All I have right now is remember who you are. Do your genealogy. Think tribally. And begin to change your world. It starts with you. Much love to you all. Till next time.
I'm looking at the Doodle Vision. He says, y'all put a new meaning to those Dutch ships. At the end of the day, man, don't get caught up in YouTube personalities or what they put in their videos, man. Make them show and prove who they are. That includes anybody here on the panel. If can't nobody vouch for you and don't nobody know who you are you really who you say you are? Or are you just going off of reputation, likes, and subscribers? It's time to show and prove. What are you doing in your community? Ask them. Make them show you. They got all this technology to do videos and stuff. How many of the people in their chat live where they live? If nobody that comes on there in their chat lives in their community, that's kind of suspect. That's just me. I'm just saying. Especially if you're claiming to be doing something in the community. Ask them the questions. Not out loud, not in person, but ask them. What are they doing and can they improve it? And if not, why not? It's time for the talking to stop. It's time for the work to get done. We a couple of months away from 2020 and people are still in BS mode. This is not the time. It's not the time. So, at the end of the day, it's always a blessing. I always feel privileged and honored to be able to speak and learn and grow with you as I get this information out as I receive it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bones H. McCoy, and he can take us out.
Basically, all I can say is the information that we dig up does no one no good if you don't take it and apply it. So on that note, it's always fun when we get to kick it with the relatives. No place we'd rather be. And until the next Rising Show, peace.
Peace, everyone.